Just a quick reminder before we jump in. Everything we share here is personal and subjective and meant for entertainment and educational purposes only. We reflect on patterns and dynamics from our lives, research, and what we've learned from our work. But this isn't professional advice or a substitute for therapy. When we mention people like family, friends, or exes, those references are intentionally vague or altered to protect privacy and don't reflect every person in our lives who fits those labels. Our goal is to support healing, not blame. Please check the full disclaimer in the show notes for more information.
Welcome to Self-Centered, the podcast that's all about you. We're your hosts.
I'm Allie, a therapist and life coach.
And I'm Katie, a fitness coach and personal trainer. We know what it's like to feel burnt out, taken for granted, and like your life revolves around everyone but yourself.
By learning to trust yourself, prioritize your needs, and set healthy boundaries, we help you break free from guilt, overfunctioning, and toxic patterns that keep you stuck in relationships and a life that doesn't truly serve you.
Join us each week as we dive into the tools, stories, and mindset shifts you need to create a life that centers you.
Because being self-centered isn't selfish, it's essential. So today we're going to talk about boundaries, and I'm sure y'all are like, what? You're talking about boundaries? You've talked about boundaries so much. And we have, because they're important and an essential part of being self-centered. And guess what? It's nuanced AF. So we're going to get into it even more. This is also part one of a 2-part episode. And you're not even going to get the second episode next week. You're going to get it the week after. So y'all will just have to wait a little bit. It's going to be juicy. But the reason that we're doing this episode is because I have been seeing all over social media so many people saying, oh my gosh, our culture is so obsessed with boundaries to the point where we are using them too much and it's almost coddling people and making them less connected in their relationships, or it's reinforcing their reactivity and their avoidance of triggers, right? I don't want to be triggered, so I have these really strong boundaries. And so we're going to talk about that today because there is a such thing as boundaries that are too strong, boundaries that are too rigid. And I'm going to give you an example of one of these posts that I saw. And it was actually someone else who put it on their story. So this is from War Paint Journal on Instagram. I don't even know who they are. Like I said, this was just on someone's story. I'm going to go through it slowly. Everyone is so emotionally intelligent nowadays. They completely miss the part where love sometimes means being patient with someone who's still figuring things out. We've learned the language of boundaries and red flags so well, we forgot that healing doesn't always look pretty or perform well. We live in a time where one wrong text can end a connection, and one imperfect moment can brand someone as unsafe. Where protecting your peace is sometimes just avoiding intimacy. We confuse regulation with disconnection, clarity with control, detachment with wisdom. And in doing so, we build curated lives filled with people who never challenge our edges and only mirror them. We mistake emotional intelligence for emotional convenience. And then we wonder why everything feels so distant even when we're doing everything right. I think the point that they're trying to make is that because we have heard so much about boundaries in pop culture on social media, people are taking it too far and they're thinking that they're doing something really healthy, but overdoing a boundary and being too rigid with it is actually not emotional maturity. That's actually not emotional intelligence. That's emotional avoidance. And I don't know what the word would be, but you're overprotecting yourself. It's like you're wrapping yourself around bubble wrap and, you're making yourself too fragile. So today we're going to talk about that. But first, we're going to review. We have a whole boundaries episode. If you haven't listened to that, go listen to that. And here's a short little review, just a little refresher. What are boundaries? Boundaries are the personal limits that we set to protect our energy, emotions, time, and well-being. They define how we want to be treated, what we are and aren't available for, and what we will do in response to others' behavior. Boundaries aren't about controlling others. We hear that a lot, right? Where people say, well, they didn't respect my boundary. They didn't do what I wanted. And the boundary is actually about your behavior. It's you not being available for or not engaging with that person if they're engaging in a behavior that you've already said that you're not available for, right? We talked about this in the boundaries episode, that you can think of boundaries like a fence that has gates in it. And the fence is, this is what I'm not available for. You don't get access to me, right? You're inside the fence, side note. You don't get access to me if you engage in these behaviors because there's no gate there. That's a fence. You stay on the outside. And here are the ways that you can engage with me. If you talk to me respectfully, if you're kind, if you are trustworthy, then you can come through the gate and we can interact. But if you try to come up here and you're going to be disrespectful and mean, then there's no gate for that. You don't get access to me. So when we communicate our fence and our gates clearly, and then we follow through consistently on allowing that fence to be a fence, meaning we don't say, oh, wait, let me quickly build a gate there because I don't want to make you mad, then that's what leads to building healthier relationships and a life that's self-centered, right? Where we can protect ourselves and not get out of our seat. On the pod, we have mostly talked about boundaries when they're too weak. So that would be there's too many gates in the fence or there's just no fence at all, right? So there's no protection. You are available for everything. You don't get any choice about how people treat you. And of course, that leads to being more vulnerable to being taken advantage of. You're not protected. It leads to overextending yourself, being taken advantage of, burning yourself out. And that's why we focus so much on how do you have healthier boundaries? So going from these weak boundaries to healthy boundaries. But what we haven't talked about is when boundaries are too rigid. So that's mostly what we're going to focus on today. Before we move forward, though, I do want to acknowledge that there is a reason that we have rigid boundaries, and it's because at some point we probably had to put walls up to survive. Right? So if you have been hurt, if you've been betrayed, if you have experienced letting yourself be open and really those weak boundaries, right? If you haven't had gates in the fence or you haven't had a fence at all, then you're like, oh crap, I need to maybe build a fortress that's made of iron, and there's a moat and a dragon, right? And so you do that. You create these rigid boundaries because you needed them to survive. But then when you come out of survival mode, if it remains your autopilot that you have these rigid boundaries and you have this fortress with a moat and the dragon, then the armor that did truly once protect you is now actually what's keeping love and connection out. And we've talked about this before. The quality of our life, research shows, is based on the quality of our relationships. And so we don't want that for you. So here are some signs that your boundaries might be too rigid. If you're wondering, is this me? Are they talking about me? So you pride yourself on never needing help, but you secretly feel alone. You cut people off at the first red flag, even if they're open to repair and want to work on it and fix it. You say, I'm just protecting my peace, but you actually feel isolated. Or you don't share anything vulnerable. Unless you feel like I've moved past that, I feel really good. So when I'm sharing this, I'm not going to feel emotional. So I can share something, vulnerable information, but without the feeling associated with it, right? There's still a wall there. If any of that hit home for you, you're probably just protecting a part of you that just never felt safe enough to let those walls down. And maybe you went all in on boundaries. And our society and social media and pop culture has been telling you boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. So you thought, well, I'm doing this thing that takes care of me, but now I'm feeling lonely. Now I'm feeling like I can't actually connect with people. And then that's reinforcing me feeling like I can't trust anyone because I'm not actually having interactions with people who would be trustworthy that would help me re-experience healthy relationships. What are rigid boundaries and why do we use them? Rigid boundaries are overly strict they're inflexible, and these are boundaries that limit emotional closeness, intimacy, or connection. And like I said, we use them because we're scared of emotional closeness because of trauma that we've had in relationships where we were hurt, or because of trauma where we survive by avoiding our own emotions, and therefore we don't know how to regulate or tolerate emotions, whether they're ours or someone else's. If someone's getting emotional, a wall goes up. And we're not going to be empathetic, compassionate, right? And you might think about, I was thinking about this. And I'm like, oh, a lot of my exes, right? It's emotional unavailability is what that is. It's like, oh, you are feeling feelings. That reminds me of my feelings that I'm walled off against internally. So I have these rigid internal boundaries where I'm not even connecting to my own experience. So I definitely can't tolerate your experience, right? People can only meet you as far as they've gone in their own journey. So they will have these rigid boundaries to avoid vulnerability or rejection, or to not get too invested maybe, or just to not get reminded of their own stuff that they're avoiding. Yeah. And they might even say, oh, you're so sensitive, or you're too much, or you're dramatic. And really, you're a normal human having normal feelings and expressing them in a completely healthy, normal way. And it's just that they're actually avoiding their stuff, right? Or maybe this is you, right? No judgment here. We're all just trying to get through this and figure out how to make it work. The other reason that we use rigid boundaries is because we have gone through trauma where we didn't have control, we didn't have autonomy, we didn't have choice. And having rigid boundaries helped us regain a sense of control. So I'm just going to give a few examples of what these rigid boundaries sound like and why they're too strong. And then I'm going to ask Katie about if there's any times in her life that she's set some rigid boundaries, because I can't think of any for myself. So,
don't worry, I got you.
We're going to phone a friend over here. Okay, so I got 4 examples of what a rigid boundary can sound like. Not comprehensive, right? I mean, like there's other examples of this. I don't let anyone help me, even when I'm overwhelmed. So that's rooted in fear of appearing weak or dependent, and that prevents connection and support.
Guilty.
Another example. Katie's like, yes, I can provide several examples.
Continue on.
Here's another one. If someone crosses a line once, I cut them off completely.
Oh, not guilty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah, exactly. We don't get that one. I can't relate to that either. If you're doing that, if you can relate to that, that lacks flexibility or room for repair. And it's not using discernment. It's not looking at, okay, well, they crossed a line, but did they know about the line? Did I communicate the line? What's my history with them? Have they been trustworthy and this was just a mistake? So we want to have discernment, and that doesn't have that. Another example is I don't attend social events because I might get triggered. And that's avoidance rather than working through, right? And just a little side note, what we know about anxiety is that the longer that we avoid what makes us anxious, the bigger the anxiety becomes. So in the short term, when we avoid the anxiety, right, when we say, oh, I'm not going to go to that social event because I might get triggered, the anxiety decreases in that moment in the short term. But in the long term, the anxiety increases because our brain gets the message that, oh, the reason that I feel relieved is because I avoided a threat. And that increases the anxiety. Whereas if you approach the things that make you anxious, and of course, we're talking about things that make you anxious that are not really threats, right? So just to be clear, when we approach the things that make us anxious, in the short term, we have more anxiety because we're going to the thing that might trigger us. And in the long run, we get through that experience and we're like, that was hard, but it was okay. I could do it. And our brain is like, wait, we survived. It's fine. This isn't as much a threat as I thought it was.
So basically like exposure therapy?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. Exposure
Okay,
therapy. Yep. And when we avoid, that also leads to isolation, obviously, right? So that's something to think about as well. The last example is I keep all my relationships surface level because I don't trust anyone or I don't want to be rejected. Why are these examples of boundaries that are too strong? Well, they're generalizing instead of discerning the unique situation. In that example of I don't attend social events because I might get triggered, that's social events in general. That's not, I don't see this specific person, or I don't go to these specific events because there's a history of them being legitimately unsafe, and that's a true threat, right? That wouldn't be a rigid boundary. But when you just generalize and say, yeah, I just can't trust people in general, then that makes your world smaller. It increases your anxiety and isolates you. When you're setting rigid boundaries, they're rigid because there's no room for dialogue, growth, or repair. It's just you're cut off, or I'm not doing this, right? It's very all or nothing. It's very extreme. And of course, that limits connection, that limits opportunity to improve things. Just a caveat, though, as I'm talking about this, when we talk about rigid boundaries, we are talking about using them in situations when it's unnecessary to have that strong of a boundary. And there's drawbacks to using it, like, oh, now I'm more anxious in the long run, or now I'm isolated, or now I feel alone and like I can't depend on anyone to help me. But in situations where you truly have to have no contact with someone, for example, it makes sense to have strong boundaries, and that would be considered a healthy boundary, right? Like restraining orders are not a rigid boundary. Like restraining orders are granted because there's a threat. Mm-hmm. It's really about the context of the unique context of the situation. If it's a legitimate threat, and you have a strong boundary, that's healthy. But if there isn't a legitimate threat, if you're just generalizing and you're just saying, I don't let anyone help me even when I'm overwhelmed, even the people who have shown me that they want to help me, they're not going to use it against me later, there aren't going to be strings attached, that's generalizing. And that's when it's rigid. Okay. So Katie.
Hello.
Have there been times in your life where you've had boundaries that were too rigid? Or maybe an example so we don't run away.
Yeah, I could run away. Yeah, so the one that comes to mind for me, and oh God, there's so much context with this. So I'm going to try not to have to give a million pieces of context, but pieces of context that are relevant. My marriage, I've talked a lot about my marriage. Mm-hmm. We dated for 5 years before we got married. And there was a break in there because a boundary was violated. And then a lot more boundaries were violated.
Of yours, I'm assuming.
Of mine. Yep. So, I mean, one of them was he was lying to me about something, using substances that we were both on the same page that, hey, we shouldn't be using that within the context of people that we want to spend the rest of our life with, etc. One of the things that was occurring in that relationship, and here's the red flag, guys, just put yourself in my shoes for a little bit to understand why this boundary is important, but there's a red flag. When he and I started dating, I was 17 and he was 20 and quickly turned 21. And he was a leader at my church within my youth group. So there was a power dynamic there. Hindsight being 2020, shouldn't have gone there, shouldn't have done that. But hey, we did. What happened within the first couple years of our relationship was there was a lot of sexual pressure. And I am a goody two-shoe. I am a rule follower, and I was very religious at the time. So I had so much guilt and shame. Like, I feel it in my body even when I think back to those moments. Like, it would physically shut me down and physically close me off every time that I would think about those experiences. And it was like, it would be, we would be cuddling or whatnot, and then he would very quickly be pressuring me and forcing himself on me and that sort of thing.
So you never felt safe cuddling, probably?
No, and it created a lot of issues within our relationship long term. So for 2.5 years, the first portion of our relationship, this is the dynamic of, okay, well, he's pressuring me sexually. I'm feeling super guilty about it. He ends that pressuring with, I'm so awful. You shouldn't be around me. I'm terrible. So then it's guilt tripping, and it's like, Yeah. And so then there's the whole like, oh, well, I need you. You're so good for me, but I'm not good for you. You need to get away. Like there was a lot of things going on there, a lot of manipulation going on, and the brain was not good. I'm a fucking 17-year-old at that point, right?
Yeah.
And then, 18 and 19. So due to something unrelated, we ended up breaking up. When we, 4 months later, ended up getting back together, there were a lot of layers that came to that. One of them being my awareness that, okay, this person cannot respect my sexual boundaries. And I felt so guilty about that for so long. And I'm finally not feeling guilty anymore because I'm not engaging in that sexual sin, put it in quotes. Because again, very religious context at the time. So when we started dating again, I put literally a list of 10 rules. And yeah, I have it somewhere in an old phone written down, but it was like, you can't talk to other girls because there was a girl that he was fraternizing with that I later found out was a full-fledged fuck me situation that he was lying to me about, and he maintained that relationship afterwards, and it was a whole thing for years. That was fun. My intuition was right, but I didn't trust my intuition there. There you go.
Yeah, you just didn't know. You don't know what you don't know, and you were 17 and didn't know.
Well, I knew enough in my gut, and I ignored it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So no talking to other women. The other one was removing all physical intimacy. Like, couldn't even kiss you on the cheek, sort of removing physical intimacy. Couldn't cuddle, couldn't like be face to face hugging. Like it was like, okay, the most that we can do is hold hands. And at that point I was 20 years old and he was 24. So envision yourself as those two young adults. It's like,
yeah.
How do you have a relationship and like claim this is any different than any friendship, right?
And honestly, maybe even more boundary than a friendship, because not even being able to like really hug or like squeeze you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So I went like far pendulum swing because I was really anxious about, okay, well, you're going to fucking assault me again.
Yeah.
And so that continued on for probably 8 months, our relationship like that. And we ended up deciding to get married.
Yeah.
And then we changed that boundary. And then it, of course, went the hard pivot the other way again. And there was all the shame and all the guilt and all the things all over again. But yeah, so that was my super rigid boundary. The reason that we ended up changing it, though, was because we felt so disconnected from each other. It was like, I don't even know why I'm in a relationship with you. Like, I can't have connection with you, the vulnerability concept of it, because I can't like feel safe and close to you.
Right. Right.
Now, could I have felt safe and close with him truly? Not likely, but at
you
what I
really
understood.
have safety. It's like you could either have a feeling of safety but no connection, or you could have connection but no safety in that relationship. You couldn't have both.
Yeah.
And that's one of the red flags.
Yeah, and so that's what I ended up choosing was connection with no safety eventually. That was, I just bust down the fence.
So you went from, rigid boundaries to weak boundaries.
Entirely, yeah.
And that happens to a lot of us. Similar to the communication styles when we go from passive to aggressive or aggressive to passive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And now, in retrospect, what would you have done differently in that situation? Because it sounds like you wouldn't set that rigid boundary of those 10 things.
No. So what's interesting, that was me trying to control what I couldn't control for so long, right? One, being manipulated and then, essentially assaulted, and not feeling safe within a relationship, not being able to trust him because I knew that he was talking to other women, and that how could you trust someone if they were lying to your face about it? So I was like, well, if there's this rule and you break it, then it's pretty clear it's time for me to move on, right? The reality is all of those are fucking red flags from the get-go. Yeah. Yeah. If I was self-centered at that time and I felt, assured in myself and secure, I would have recognized this person's not good for me. I can't just create all of these rules and this person fit within the box. I was trying to force a relationship to work that was truly not compatible. Yeah. Our stated values did not equate to what was being acted out in real life.
Yeah. If you can't have a relationship with someone without these excessively rigid boundaries, then it means that you shouldn't have a relationship with them.
Exactly.
And that's something that you learn from that experience.
Yeah, definitely. And the overarching things that I was trying to create safety around in terms of like, okay, more, a more conservative approach to intimacy early on in a relationship, that can be done without creating a, we can't kiss.
Right.
That's possible, right? But I was also sold the very religious, and I'm talking like cult-like religious, that, oh yeah, even a guy looking at you is sexual sin, and you're tempting him.
Yeah. Well, when I said, well, you didn't know better, and you said, well, I felt it in my gut. My gut knew, and I didn't listen to it. Yes, and because of that cult-like religion and the teachings of it, you were taught that your intuition is not.
Yeah,
It makes sense that you're like, okay, I'm noticing this, but I can't trust that.
Yeah.
You were taught not to trust yourself.
That is my...
Could that be the devil?
Honestly.
No, I know that.
This is my bone to pick.
Okay.
With religion. And I want to point out, this is not all religion. This is not all denominations within, the Christian religion. I have context and experience with Christian religion. I don't have context and experience with other religions. So understand that I have a very narrow scope here. But this is my bone to pick with the religious experiences that I've had, is it removes your internal locus of control. It says that anything that happens that's bad is some outside higher power, something that you have no influence over. It's their fault, the devil. And that you literally cannot control your impulses. That you have no responsibility aside from, okay, well, I just have to completely avoid it and then repent of my sins and be washed clean by something that's not my choice. It was someone else that made the choice for me. I have to repent and be washed clean of that, and then that'll make me a good person.
Yeah, and things like, so I've had clients who came from pretty intense, rigid, controlling, demeaning Christian denominations. And yes, I also have friends who have Christian denomination experiences that are really healthy and good. But the ones that aren't healthy, one of the things that I've heard is that they wanted to do yoga and they wanted to practice mindfulness, and they were told that that's the devil.
Yes.
And that if they are mindful, then it's actually giving an opening for the devil, and whatever comes to them when they're meditating is the devil, and they can't trust it. And I am thinking, that's your intuition.
Yep.
That's your awareness. So you're not allowed to be aware. You're not allowed to be self-aware.
Every single thing that could open you up, even just things that have no deeper meaning whatsoever, like Pokemon cards. That's the first thing that comes. Pokemon cards, the way that they branded that was,
like
it's pocket magic. It's pocket magic, therefore it's of the devil.
Yeah.
That's Satan trying to get to our children. Secular music, Satan trying to get to people.
Yeah. It is nuts, because when you think about it, if there is a devil, it's probably what they're doing. It's probably controlling people and teaching them not to trust themselves and not to be aware of their internal guidance system.
Yeah.
Twisted. Well, thank you for sharing. Hi, I'm Katie, and I've had rigid boundaries.
I've also had no boundaries. So
yeah, I'm glad
we love to play the sides, apparently.
Well, I mean, I think that when we don't have guidance, healthy guidance, whether it's community, whether it's family, whatever it is, when we don't get that guidance, we learn through experience, and we swing the different extremes. And if we're lucky, then we can take what we've learned from each of those extremes and we learn the hard way. And, now we come more to healthy boundaries. But you had to go through the can of worms to get there. And that's why we do this podcast, because, we want to prevent as much as possible.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So just for contrast and to make it super clear, I am going to talk a little bit about weak boundaries and healthy boundaries, and how is that different from rigid boundaries. So weak boundaries, or porous boundaries, Here are some examples. I say yes even when I don't want to, just to keep the peace. That's prioritizing other people over yourself, leads to resentment, leads to burnout. And also one of the things that I want to offer, because it has really helped me and it has really helped my clients, is when you think about a situation that you're in with other people and you're like, oh, I really feel like I need to be passive. I really need to have weak or no boundaries in order to keep the peace. It can be helpful to reframe it as they're rocking a boat. Like they are dysfunctional and, they're harming you in some way. Or, they would be angry if you said no, right? So they're rocking the boat. They're the ones rocking the boat by doing that. They're the ones with feathers that are ruffled. And so you're not rocking the boat by setting a boundary. You're just saying, I'm not going to be the counterbalance to try to keep your dysfunction from rocking the boat. Instead, you say, bye, you keep rocking your boat. I'm not going to chill out in your boat anymore. And I'm also not going to hold your boat down by abandoning myself. It's not your responsibility to keep the boat from rocking, to keep the peace when they're the ones that are disturbing the peace. Mm-hmm. Right? And what does that do for your peace? It completely ruins it. All right. Another example. I let people vent to me for hours, even when I'm emotionally drained. That was one that took me a really long time to figure out how to deal with that, because you don't want to not be there for people that you care about, but you also are exhausted. Yep. And you're like, dude, I got my own stuff I'm dealing with. And of course I want to be there for you, but I can't be 24/7 on call.
Yeah.
You
can't be the therapist friend. We talked about that in another episode, how to prevent you from being the therapist friend.
Yeah. And even therapists, you have to make an appointment and you got to pay us.
Yeah. Exactly.
And there's crisis services so that the therapists are not the crisis services. Yeah, for sure. Another example of weak boundaries. I forgive everything without requiring a change in behavior, which just opens you up to repeated harm. Right? There's no fence here, no fence protecting you. And then the last example I have is I overshare personal details quickly to feel close to someone. That is definitely something that I've seen, I've done. And when we do that, we invest too much too quickly. We don't get a chance to actually get to know someone. So their attachment forms really quickly before actually knowing the person or knowing if we can trust them and vice versa. And, it's really this, I want to be connected. That's what the weak boundaries are about, right? It's about connection is most important, not safety, not protection. Whereas with the rigid boundaries, it's protection is what's most important at the expense of connection. Why are those all too weak? Well, they're also generalized, right? I say yes even when I don't want to. I forgive everything without requiring a change in behavior. So we want to be discerning. And it also risks your safety, your autonomy, or your well-being. That's why they're weak boundaries. All right. And then for healthy boundaries, again, just to compare and contrast, to be clear, some examples are, I can't talk right now, but I can connect later when I have more energy. And that balances wanting to be a good friend, wanting to be there for them with awareness of your own capacity. The other day, I was thinking about this, how the way that we talk about boundaries, for the most part, is very overt. It's very obvious. It's like, this is my boundary. This is not okay. If you do this, then that's important sometimes. But also sometimes boundaries just don't have to sound like a big deal. Recently, a couple weeks ago, I had texted one of my friends because she lives far away from me. And I said, I would love to hang out on the phone. We'll both put our earbuds in, we'll hang out, we'll talk. And she didn't get back to me because she has one late night of working every week. And it was that night, which I realized after I had asked. And so she texted me back at like 9 o'clock or something and said, which is 8 o'clock for her. She said, I'm just putting my kid to bed and then I can call you. And by that time, because it's really hard for me to get to sleep in general, I can't have any stimulation. Like I cannot be talking to people that late. And so I said, I actually need to do my bedtime routine, but let's plan a time to talk later this week. I'll text you tomorrow. And she was like, yeah, cool. That's a boundary.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It only feels like a big deal or when people make it a big deal, right? When people don't like you having boundaries. So, yeah. All right. Another example of a healthy boundary. I'm open to feedback, but I won't accept being spoken to disrespectfully. There's room for communication, but I'm still protecting myself. So I am supporting connection and I'm supporting emotional safety. Then my last example is I can support you emotionally, but I can't solve this for you. Right? So I want to support you and I can listen. I can validate your emotions. That must be hard, but I'm not going to enable and I'm not going to overfunction, which protects you and your bandwidth. So why are those examples of healthy boundaries? Because they're flexible enough for connection, but firm enough for your personal safety and your self-respect. And they use discernment. They consider both the internal cues in that moment of how much energy do I have? What are my values? What are my needs? And then it also considers the external context of what are the dynamics in this relationship? What is the level of trust? What makes sense? Okay, so I don't have a ton of examples. I don't have any examples. I mean, I probably do, but I thought long and hard and could not come up with any. I don't have any examples of where I used overly rigid boundaries, but I do have one where I almost did, and I'm really glad that I didn't. So I'm going to share that. So a while back, I had a conflict with a friend, and it really hurt me. And it was really triggering for me too, because it brought up bad experiences from other relationships in which now I had to go no contact. And so I was thinking, oh my gosh, do I have to go no contact with her? You know, I was so upset because I care so much about her and I love her and I would miss her, but I felt like I needed to protect myself. And when this conflict had happened, I was also in a really emotionally vulnerable place. You know, I really wanted her support. And not only was I not getting that, I was getting the opposite. And her intentions were good. Just want to be really clear about that. Her intentions were really good, but it was the opposite of what I needed. And it was hard. And I did try to initially have a conversation with her, but then the response to that was pretty hurtful to me. And so I really thought, oh no, this might not work. So I had this really strong impulse to shut down and protect myself by walking away completely. And that felt like the safest choice. But there was also this part of me that's like, but is that really what you want? And then the other part was like, well, it doesn't really matter what you want if this person's harming you, you know? And then I was like, but they didn't mean it. And I think maybe it could be okay if we give it some time. So it was really tough. And I knew that she was not in a place where she was going to be able to be emotionally vulnerable and have a conversation that resolved things. And I knew that I was in a place where continuing to talk about it didn't really make sense. So initially, I didn't set a hard boundary. I just let it kind of breathe. And naturally, we just both spent less time together. And then I actually didn't talk to her for a few years. And then we both reflected, and I forget who reached out to who, but it was, hey, can we talk about what happened and see if we can move forward? So it was really clear what the goal was. And then we talked about it, and now she is still one of the closest people in my life. and I talk to her regularly. I laugh with her. I miss her so much. She doesn't live near here. She was actually the example that I was talking about that, I can't talk because it's 9 p.m., but I'll talk to you later. Yeah, I miss her so much. And we have talked on the phone a few times recently, and we're just laughing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I missed us,
Yeah.
It's been such a long time. And so I'm just so grateful that I didn't let that fear or that impulse of like, you have to protect yourself and put up these walls, that I didn't let that make the decision for me. And I really gave it time to think it through. And what that taught me is that sometimes these rigid boundaries are just scared boundaries, right? They're reactive boundaries. And if we can take the time to actually reflect and give it some space and tolerate it not being resolved and not knowing how it's going to end up, then we can collect more information. We can give it time for each person to reflect and grow and improve. And that makes it more likely that you're not going to have to end a relationship. So now we do have both the safety and the connection. And the other thing I want to share, though, is that because I think it's really important to share the aspects of stories that aren't just like this textbook, really neat, tie it up with a bow kind of thing. And my boundaries with her are tweaked a little bit still. I wouldn't say that I have walls up necessarily because I don't feel any kind of like emotion or fear. But I think I learned from that experience that and I think she would agree with this too, because this was part of the conversation that we had about what happened, how did that happen, and how can we kind of avoid that moving forward. And I think that when I'm in a really anxious place, and I'm worrying, that actually increases anxiety for her. And then that's difficult for her. And then the way that she responds to me is from an anxious place. So it just taught me about her and about me and about our dynamic together, that when I'm in that place, it doesn't work for us to, like she's not the one for me to go to when I'm in that place. Like I go to you, like you've seen me, like, oh my gosh, you so ground me. And you know exactly what I'm talking about when I'm like, la, la, la.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, I do. And it's intense. And I think a lot of the times, because of, again, social media and pop psychology and boundaries, and these really rigid expectations of people, I think a lot of people in this situation might think, well, they should be able to still be there for me. Something's wrong with them that they can't. You know what I mean? And so I shouldn't be friends with them, right? But to me, it's, no, we still get to be friends. We just know the context that it works. And that doesn't mean anything wrong with her or bad about her or me. It's like we're compatible in this context and we're not compatible in that context. We both know it. We both respect it. Also, that might change in the future. Things might shift with her work or my work, where like the dynamic when we come together in those kind of emotional situations is different. But for now, she is an amazing friend that I get to have fun with and talk about serious things too, just as long as I'm emotionally regulated in the moment. But when I'm falling apart and I'm like, I need an anchor, that's not my anchor, right? Like I'm treading water and I'm like, you're my buoy. And then we both just sink, right? So it's like just knowing that. And so I just want to share that because I think a lot of the times we give these like overly clean examples, which is helpful when you're teaching things, right? Because it's like simple and easy to understand. But I also just want to be like real life about it. So you selfies, when you're listening, you can think about, oh yeah, I have a friend where, there's this piece of our relationship that doesn't work. And we accept that and just enjoy the other parts of our relationship. Mm-hmm. Of course, if there's one piece of your relationship that doesn't work, that one piece actually overpowers the rest of the relationship and is constantly present, then that's not like, yes, it's one piece, but it's one piece that's ruining the whole dang thing. So that's different.
I'd like to add to that example.
Do it.
Something that I think is valuable, and one of the reasons why taking that pause and taking that breath and then, coming back later really worked in that specific situation is because you both have love for each other and there was nothing that was self-serving about what she was communicating to you.
Right.
she was trying to be protective of you. Just unfortunately, the package and the way that it came
Exactly.
across
Her
was not
intentions
right.
were so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when you're setting a rigid versus a flexible versus a weak boundary, you have to really consider the intent of the relationship and the person that you're setting it with. Does this person have good intentions towards me? Do they have good thoughts and feelings towards me? Do they give me the benefit of the doubt? Vice versa?
Yeah.
If not, well, then yeah, it makes maybe more sense to have a rigid boundary. But
Right.
if so, taking that pause, taking that breath, or just setting a moderate, healthy boundary, that might be the better choice.
Yeah. You just segued us into the next part.
No way!
Yeah, for sure. It's, selfies, if you're in one of these tricky situations when you know that you need to set a boundary, but you're not sure how strong it needs to be, these are some things you can think about,
Bam.
Nice, Katie.
Teamwork.
So you can ask yourself these questions, and these questions do connect to our centered framework. Go listen to that episode if you haven't. So the first question is, do you understand your needs, your limits, your values, and your preferences in this situation? Do I know what I need? What's my bandwidth? How much energy do I have? All of that. That's really important. And that connects to the clarity of self pillar of the centered framework, which is knowing who you are. What do you value? What do you need? And letting that clarity guide your choices. The next one is, can you hold boundaries with confidence rather than reactivity or shutdown? If you can't, then you probably want to give it a little bit of time so that you can come out of that reactivity, out of that shutdown protective place before you make a decision. So with the example with my friend, I was totally in a reactive and shutdown place, depending on the moment. I mean, you remember, I was talking about this all the time. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, and that is not a place where I would feel confident about setting any kind of boundary because, I wasn't regulated.
Yeah.
And emotion regulation isn't about being calm or neutral. It's about being able to stay present with those feelings that are coming up without getting hijacked by them. Yeah. And I was getting hijacked by them. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you're making these decisions related to your boundaries from a regulated place where you're not hijacked. The next question, are you safe in this relationship? Do you have the bandwidth to be more open, or do you need to conserve? That's related to needs ownership, recognizing, honoring, and advocating for your own needs without guilt or over-explaining. So all of these questions are helping you discern, right? Instead of generalizing, it's helping you to really get into what's going on inside of me and what do I need, and then let's discern the external context. And then the last couple of questions are, what's the level of trust? What are the power dynamics? What's the history of patterns in this relationship? And am I met with mutual respect, which is really what you were just talking about before? Or does this person overstep repeatedly? And that's about reciprocity in relationships, because we really only want to be investing in mutual connections that support safety, that support growth, that support trust, and don't exploit power. You can ask yourself those questions, and that will help you get a sense of how strong does my boundary need to be? What makes sense? When you're listening to those, is there anything that you think about related to your situation with your ex?
I mean, if I'm thinking back to that situation, I mentioned this when I said the example of it was a clear sign that this is not a compatible relationship, but the power dynamics and safety were not there, period. And that...
You mean the power dynamics were there, but it was
not for me.
Yeah. He had too much power.
He had way too much power.
Okay. And no trust.
No trust.
Okay.
And I was not safe.
Aw, yeah.
And I think too, because in that season of my life, again, with the religious context there, it didn't feel safe sharing, hey, I'm struggling with this, because you felt like you would be bad, so to speak, or you would be ostracized. And do I actually think that my community would ostracize me? Maybe not necessarily, but I certainly think that the roles of leadership and the roles of volunteerism and things that I was doing would have been taken from me, and those were a big part of my identity. So like, even though I was able to give,
that is ostracizing though.
it is, but it would be like, okay, you're not in alignment with the values that our belief system holds, therefore you can't be leading anybody else in it. So you're going to need to take a step back and just receive.
You're lost. The devil has your ear.
Yeah, pretty much. So it was like, that was a big part of it, is I didn't feel safe sharing those struggles with anyone. And I also hadn't had experiences of vulnerability with like caregivers in my life that I could share those experiences and them receive them and talk to me without punishment or me feeling like there would be punishment. So it was hard to gain perspective on it. It was either like an all or nothing boundary, of course. And when I'm looking back on it, I'm just like, girl, those were your signs. Like, you had an out. It was so obvious. Why did you say yes to go? And I remember, this was so wild, is, you know, when we started talking again and those things were starting to come up for me, and I was like, do I really want to enter into this relationship again? But it was the only thing I ever knew.
Yeah.
You know, it was the only long-term commitment that I ever knew. It was the only like real long-term relationship and place where I felt quote unquote loved. And so it felt devastating to remove that connection, because also in my life I didn't have really vulnerable connections, and that was the first place that existed. So for it to also, you know, have the power dynamic, and for me to have been so vulnerable and that been taken advantage of, that like,
oh my gosh.
and then, you know, you get that back and forth of, oh, okay, well, you're too good for me, you know, I need your help, and I'm not good enough for you, yada yada, and like it being this like savior complex almost.
Yeah.
There was just a lot that was there. Hindsight being 2020, my urgency to set a rigid boundary should have been my sign that, hey, this isn't for me. That should have been my conversation, and it would have been totally fine. Had I made that choice, granted, my entire life would be so different. I would be an entirely different person, because I would have never left Florida either. Which is terrifying.
Yeah, that is terrifying. I never would have met you.
I know. For all of that to have happened and me to have come to California, like, I'm grateful for that, because like that at least got me to where I am today. Like, that really was a catalyst to be in that relationship for another,
like, getting out of the
7
cult
years.
and being able to learn other ways of
Yes,
thinking about
getting
things
away from my wild. But it really was a moment that I should have taken to pause and to say, why am I wanting to set this rigid boundary? Am I wanting to control the situation to create something that this person is not capable of creating with me? Or will this actually support our relationship? The reality is it didn't. And so we had to hard pivot the other way, and I had to lose all my boundaries.
Yeah.
Which opened me up to abuse. So,
And that's why we do this.
yeah. That's why you also talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So we hope that y'all learned from us today. Well, for every episode, we hope that you learn from us, and that this helps you to stay safe and connected, and to learn, how can I use boundaries in a way to support that goal, to stay safe and connected, and being able to identify, when have I and am I regularly using weak boundaries where I'm investing too much in the connection at the expense of my safety, and that includes emotional safety, and that also includes burnout and energy. Okay, so just to be clear, it's not just physical safety.
Yeah.
And then rigid boundaries, recognize where maybe you're investing too much in protecting yourself when you actually don't really need to anymore, because there isn't a threat there, and you're kind of generalizing from your past trauma, and therefore you're isolating yourself, and it's getting in the way of connection. So the goal isn't to avoid all conflict, and it's not to cancel all connection, right? It's more flexible than that. It's setting these clear value-based limits, inviting repair and change when it's possible, protecting your peace, and then deciding what your boundary is with discernment, not from reactivity or a knee-jerk reaction. And I also want to say, there is no judgment here we have all been there. We are sharing this to support you, and it takes time to change patterns. So just because you heard this episode, don't think that you're going to just change everything overnight, and don't be hard on yourself that you're not going to. Literally, for anything
call
that
yourself
we talk
a failure for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because really the first step is like even noticing it, identifying it, observing it in your everyday life, paying attention to, okay, what's getting in the way here, right? Listening to the communication styles episode, get a therapist. Like, this takes time. And you know, we're working on this stuff forever, but if you are in this place where you have weak boundaries or rigid boundaries, or you're going back and forth between the two, you are in a place where you don't know how to be safe and be connected in relationships. And that is kind of an SOS moment, you know, where you really do want to prioritize this, but give yourself time to improve. It's completely fine that you're human. So, all right. We will see you next week. Oh, wait. I want to tell you about part 2, just a little, so you know.
Yeah. Who knows what part 2 is going to be?
Yeah, so you know.
I don't even know. Wait, do I know? Maybe I know.
I think you know. So we are going to talk about these different strengths of boundaries. So rigid boundaries, weak boundaries, and flexible, healthy boundaries, but on a cultural level. So on a collective level. So how does this show up? So I'll just leave you a little teaser. Which one do you think cancel culture is? Don't answer. It's a rhetorical question. So which one's cancel culture? Right? Okay. That's it. Okay. Now we'll see you next week. Not for part 2, for something else, but then you'll get part 2 after that. Okay. Bye. 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 Thanks for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at selfcentered.pod, or connect with us at selfcenteredthepod@gmail.com.
Stay self-centered, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Peace.